Bantam continued to churn out Star Wars books in 1994. Champions of the Force was the fourth of 5 books that they would release that year, and it came out in October of 1994. It did pretty well on the New York Times paperback bestseller list. It made it all the way to number 4 for the week of October 2nd and was ultimately on the list for 8 weeks. This was also not Kevin J. Anderson's only foray into the Star Wars universe. He wrote Darksaber, which came out in 1996. He co-wrote the Young Jedi Knight series with his wife, which featured the adventures of a teenaged Jaina and Jacen Solo. And he edited 3 collections of themed short stories. So my recollection of this one, once again, I remembered big things, overarching things, but not so much the connective tissue that went in between. I found it very interesting how subplots would build to climaxes and then denouements over and over again in a weird fashion. So, a brief summary. Luke Skywalker lies in a comatose state after an attack by Kyp Durron and the evil spirit Exar Kun, so his pupils are on their own against that evil Sith shadow. Han heads off in a last-ditch attempt to stop Kyp Durron from his path of vengeance. Leia hurries off to retrieve Admiral Akbar and rescue her baby from imminent Imperial kidnapping. And Wedge Antilles and Chewbacca head to the Maw installation to liberate the Wookiee slaves and shut that bad Imperial place down. So the Princess Leia costume count, disappointing, again. Really, no descriptions of what she's wearing, no descriptions of her hairdos. She's there, it's just clearly not important to know what out of her extensive wardrobe she's wearing this time. I talked previously about how I really did not like what Anderson did with Luke in both Jedi Search and Dark Apprentice. And in Champions of the Force, it's just really disappointing. He spends the first half of the story essentially a Force ghost, unable to communicate with anyone except for his toddler niece and nephew. That culminates in a horrific scene in which he sort of possesses his nephew to fight evil Sith creatures. It's awful. Not yet 3-year-old should not be using a lightsaber and should not be using a lightsaber with any skill and finesse. And then once he is revived, he's not really useful. They send Kyp Durron to him to find out what his sentence will be, and he's just like, oh, forgiven, which I'll get to that. And then he accompanies Kyp on the mission to dispose of the Sun Crusher, but he's not really needed. You could have cut him out and it would have been fine. So it's just sad to see Luke so useless, essentially. After being a pivotal part of the second book, Leia is once again just there for Champions of the Force. She accompanies Akbar and the other Calamarians when they go to stop the kidnapping attempt on baby Anakin, but she's not really needed. Like Luke on the Sun Crusher mission, she's just there. If you cut her out, it would have been perfectly fine. Mon Mothma hands over the position of Chief of State to her, which is great, but we don't see any examples of her doing her job. We hear after the fact that she argues that Kyp should be able to dispose of the Sun Crusher, but like I said, we hear after the fact. It's just disappointing to go from a book where she had things to do and she was accomplishing things to a book where she's just present. Han, too, feels a bit like he's just along for the ride. At least in the first half of the book, he has a definite mission. He's stopping Kyp Durron. He's the only one that Kyp will listen to. But then the second half of the book, when Lando goes to Kessel, he's pretty much just the chauffeur. He's just driving Lando. He's not involved in Lando's business schemes. He's Lando's bride. I do like, though, that Chewie actually has something to do, a role to play. After their capture by Dala in Jedi Search, he has apparently wanted to free the other Wookiee slaves. He speaks to the New Republic Senate. They give him their approval, and he's part of the team that heads back to the Maw installation and frees the Wookiees. It's great. He's sent with 3PO, though, which is a little confusing to me. Perhaps 3PO is there as a translator, but it just seems like a very odd pairing, and that Anderson needed something to do with C-3PO, didn't know what to do with C-3PO, and just shoved him into Chewbacca's plotline. We get some resolution with Morith Duel, the Rybit who's in charge of Kessel. He dies. He's eaten by spiders. Cool. In a similar way, Exar Kun is defeated in not very exciting fashion. He keeps trying to kill Luke, influencing people and creatures to kill him. He has Streen create a storm. He sends those Sith animals. But the way that the Jedi apprentices defeat him is just light. They're all working together. It's sort of anticlimactic, and the fact that it comes at the halfway point makes it feel not as impressive as it should. That was another issue I had with the book as a whole. We would come to these climaxes that then were resolved in a frustratingly boring manner. Kyp has the Sun Crusher. He wants to hurt the Empire where it hurts most. And the first chapter is him going to the Imperial Academy on Carida. And he wants his brother. They tell him his brother is dead, so he fires a missile into the sun. And then he finds out, of course, that the Imperials lied to him. His brother's still alive. He tries to get him in time, and he dies. And then I guess he goes and blows up another planet, and wow, he was such a threat, and Han goes and chases after him, and that's it. He's pretty much about to shoot Han, and then Exar Kun is defeated, and then he's like, oh, Han, my buddy, and he gives in. And it just feels so anticlimactic. It's building to something, and then it's resolved in not an exciting way. The battle at the Maw installation sort of feels the same way. We have the scientists exit on the Death Star prototype, and then Dala appears because, of course, she didn't die in the Cauldron Nebula. And then the Death Star prototype comes back, and then the Sun Crusher comes, which should be really exciting, but instead it just feels tedious. And honestly, how many times can it look like Dala dies, but she doesn't really die? It happened at the end of Dark Apprentice. It happens near the end of Champions of the Force. She's such an idiot that the fact that she lives to see another day, I guess it's fitting for her character because she is essentially the cockroach of the Star Wars universe. But just knowing that she comes back, I'm not looking forward to that. The Jedi apprentices, too, remain remarkably opaque. Other than Kyp, who we got a very abbreviated fall to the dark side, we don't really get to know any of them. We know that Tion, for instance, is like a bard, and that Silgal is a healer. But that's it. We just get like the broadest brushes of their characters. And the fact that we really only get the names of half of them makes them feel very much not fleshed out to me. Also, who would have thought that when Thrawn sent troops to kidnap the Solo twins, that this would become a reoccurring plot line? In Champions of the Force, we finally have Ambassador Fergan trying to kidnap baby Anakin so they can have a new emperor. He's got these mountain terrain attack vehicles that have 8 legs like spiders, and they're defeated by Fido, which is this robot thing that looks like a kraken. I did not enjoy those parts. And I also did not enjoy, weirdly enough, the hints that Winter and Admiral Akbar could end up in a relationship. Up to this point, we haven't really seen a lot of human-alien relationships in Star Wars. I think that Wedge and Kyp are sort of the first one, and she's still humanoid, but Winter and Akbar just really weird me out. I mean, she's a lady, and he's a fish.
And I've read some interesting reviews that talk about how Anderson gets black holes and other of the science fiction-y aspects very, very wrong, but I just wanted to talk in a voiceover rant about one thing that he gets wrong that annoys me very much. We find out in the first book, in Jedi Search, that Wedge Antilles is now a general. Now, if you know anything about the differences between the certain types of armed forces, general is a rank that you get in the Army, whereas admiral is a rank that you get in the Navy. Now, what we know of Wedge up to this point is that he was a starfighter pilot and then a starfighter commander. So it would very much make sense for him to be an admiral in that he would be in charge of the New Republic naval forces. But instead he's a general, which is an army position, which makes no sense. He has no experience in an army role. And then the missions that he is given do not fit within an army setting either. In the first book, he's sort of in charge of construction efforts. Then he is made the personal bodyguard of Kyp the scientist, which, why is a general her bodyguard? Why would you give someone of such high rank that job? And then he's later in charge of the liberation of the Maw installation, which also, he has no background in this. I'm so confused by his rank and the jobs that he is doing. It makes no sense.
But my main problem with Champions of the Force, I'm going to call the issue of Kyp Durron's Atonement. Kyp blows up the Cauldron Nebula, which destroys one of Daala's Star Destroyers. Then he blows up a solar system and blows up another solar system. This is beyond the loss of life that Luke's destruction of the Death Star caused. This is whole solar systems. And while he killed Imperials, presumably there also were people on those worlds like Zeth, people who didn't choose to join the Empire, but were forced into it. He killed millions and millions. And the fact that when he stands before the Senate and they send him to Luke for sentencing, and all Luke does is take him to face the equivalent of the cave on Dagobah, and when he doesn't use his weapon or whatever, that proves that he's a Jedi now, it just strikes me as wrong. Kyp is essentially a war criminal. He has done very, very bad things. And for Luke to essentially just say, I was tempted to the dark side too, and you faced your fears, and now you're a Jedi, doesn't feel to me like proper atonement for what he's done. And it also feels to me like facing your fears one time is not enough to make you a Jedi. I'm not saying that Kyp needed to go to prison or Kyp deserves the death penalty, but it feels so strange to me that the New Republic government would be fine with Luke Skywalker passing judgment in such a casual way. It bothers me how easily that plot point is just tied up and discarded, and Kyp's okay now, he's one of us. Sometimes the morality in the Star Wars universe isn't delved into in great detail, I think because if you looked at it too closely, you'd realize how messed up it is, and Kyp's forgiveness is one of those instances. Champions of the Force in its own way is pivotal. It closes out plot lines, opens up the possibility of new ones, introduces a lot of characters that we'll see again in other books. Unfortunately, it's also weirdly paced, weirdly plotted, and at points just strangely written. So while I'm glad I reread them, I hope that I will not be rereading them really anytime soon. So next up, I'll be reading another strange 90s Star Wars book, The Crystal Star by Vonda N. McIntyre.